The others have gained full immigration status. There's some ways, depending on how you came into the country, depending on if you traveled on your DACA or not. This is a population that kind of covers people in their early 20s who often get married and maybe getting married to citizens. So a number of folks have gotten full immigration status and no longer need the temporary version of DACA. So mostly California and Texas. We've got a little over 3,000 folks in Idaho, but it's a pretty high proportion. Like I was looking at a map this morning that sort of does the per capita calculations, and we're higher than a lot of other states as a proportion because of our low overall population. So while this number is not particularly high as a percentage of our population, it's on the higher side. Of course, many, many more in Washington, and also a much higher percentage. Washington and Oregon are on some of the highest percentages per capita of DACA recipients, with Texas and California being by far in the lead. So there have been lots of studies on the economic impact of taking DACA away. Especially over the summer last year when it became clear that President Trump was considering that and was under pressure, and we'll talk about where that pressure came from, to stop the DACA program. Initially when he took office, people were concerned that like the next day there was going to be some removal of DACA with kind of chaos ensuing. And he sort of kept it going along for a while. So, but then we started to see over the summer that he was really considering a change to that. So some of these studies looked at employment rates, educational attainment, all kind of the impact on the economy from losing this population. And, in terms of immigration debates and policy, this is sort of the golden population, which is why it has been, the beneficiary of executive policies and some of the highest kind of approval ratings and congressional interest, because you've got people who are, to be in DACA, you are self-defined as being here for a long time. Like anybody who has DACA at this point has been here for over 10 years. Being in school, or having achieved, at least a high school diploma, and then having work authorization, so that allows you to work in the formal labor market and generally make more money. And so we've seen, a bunch of studies that, the educational attainment is quite significant, along with the lower rates of teenage pregnancy, because there's a high incentive to stay in school and continue studying through college. So looking at all these different losses in terms of economic growth and GDP, when the Trump administration was considering this, a lot of sort of the business magazines were against his decision to stop DACA, and then a lot of the tech industries were particularly concerned because they employ a lot of DACA recipients and were concerned about the loss to their workforce. So you can see that in terms of the huge losses projected annually in Washington in particular. Our DACA workforce tends to be more agricultural, but significant losses here as well in the South. Okay, so what's going on now? Basically can't answer this question, and it's a great one to continue to ask. Okay, so on, I think it was Labor Day itself, Trump rescinded DACA, and he did this in sort of a, he intended to do this in a gradual way. So on September 5th, 2017, he said, okay, I'm stopping DACA, but I'm not gonna stop it today. I'm gonna give everybody whose work authorization expires in the next 6 months one opportunity to renew. And so you had 30 days to find everybody, be like, look at your card, look at your card. Is it gonna expire before March 5th? If so, you have to get here before October 31st. And folks were just, it was and it was even before that, I guess it was October 5th. it was really confusing because people were like, wait a minute, is it ending October 5th? Does everybody lose their work authorization March 5th? How's this all work? And the idea was to give the folks who were going to lose their DACA soon one last chance to renew it, hopefully buying time for Congress to create legislation that meant that nobody ever lost their DACA. But if you, I mean, we saw the person at WSU was like, my DACA expires on March 6th. I was like, well, let's just try anyway. And that application was rejected, right? So if you missed that 6-month mark by a day, you just had to hope that this was all going to work out for you somehow with Congress. And then the work authorizations were going to expire whenever your card expired, right? So there wasn't sort of some deadline where everybody lost their status, but you lost day to day thousands of people with DACA status based on when their cards expired. So we did a bunch of sort of outreach at that time. There's a really active group on WSU's campus that was doing outreach to make sure that everybody who could renew was renewing to take advantage of kind of that last opportunity, because it would give you 2 more years of work authorization, even if sort of Congress failed to do anything. Also, immediately, there were lawsuits filed in a court in New York, in New York City, and in the Central District in California, that included several states. So the attorney generals of several states were suing to stop, and this is where the double negatives get really confusing, to stop the stoppage of DACA, right? The University of California, which is led by Janet Napolitano, who wrote the memo that created DACA, also sued. She was like, I know a thing or two about this, and so I'm going to go into court and try to keep you from undoing my work. And then there were suits by individuals who had DACA status. It kind of represented a range of what that looked like, including lawyers with DACA status, doctors, students at different levels. A UI grad who was speaking here in February, Luis Cortez, he received DACA while he was at law school with us, and is one of the attorneys representing that DACA group in litigation, though not a plaintiff himself, but he's here only based on his DACA status as well. Well, that's why he's authorized to work anyway. And he had to get barred in California because we don't allow people who don't have permanent status to become lawyers in Idaho. So one thing to note, so part of the reason that Trump reached his decision on September 5th, 2017, was because 9 attorneys general, including ours, threatened to sue and said, if you don't stop this program, we will file suit on September 6th of 2017. And so President Trump cited that letter threatening litigation as the basis for rescinding DACA. Okay, so these 2 separate lawsuits go forward, and in January, and then maybe early February, district judges in both of those lawsuits said the reasons that what President Trump had done to stop DACA was unlawful. He didn't go through the right procedures, and he cited a wrong reason. So he said, well, we can't continue DACA. DACA is illegal. And the 2 courts were like, well, no, DACA is not illegal, and you haven't, using that as the reason to change your policy is not a valid reason. So we don't think you've done this in the right way, and we also think you didn't go about it in the right procedure. You didn't do a more formal process to allow for notice and comment from the public, and actually sort of contemplate the true ramifications and all of the implications of that policy change. So right now, we've got 2 judges saying, sort of from opposite coasts, covering the entire country, that the Trump administration is not allowed to stop DACA. it is somewhat limited though. So if you've never applied for DACA, you cannot apply now. The court orders are limited to only people who are applying to renew. And you also, under DACA, sort of before September 5th, 2017, the immigration agency would give you travel authorization, so you could leave the country on a study abroad and come back in based on your DACA status. The courts also said the immigration agency doesn't have to give you that kind of permission. All they have to give you is an opportunity to renew your status and prove that you qualify for another 2 years of your work permit. That travel thing is significant because if you traveled on your DACA and you came back in, you became eligible for a green card, like if you got married. Without that travel, a lot of people are not eligible regardless of like the citizenship status of their spouses or anything about their families. So it has definitely shrunk the program, but in significant ways, these orders have allowed, hundreds of thousands of people to continue to maintain their work authorization and all the things that flow from that, like one very special card.